So if you're watching this video, you have a water pump that you need to change on a 7.3. This one is a Super Duty, which would all be the same from 99 up to 03 if you got the 7.3 Powerstroke. First things first, the very first thing we're gonna do is once you get in the garage, go underneath, get yourself a 5-gallon bucket. If you have a 2-wheel drive or your truck sits low to the ground, you'll need to jack it up. And we need to drain the radiator, which there's your drain valve right there. So you'll turn this counterclockwise until it starts to drain, which as you can see, I've already emptied mine out. Mine got about a full 5-gallon bucket. So be prepared for that much. Yours might have a little more, a little less, depending on how full your reservoir up here was. While that's draining, loosen this cap, like I did. I just stuck it back on. But loosen that cap. And sorry about that, neighbors revving up their truck. Loosen that cap, that'll help that flow. And then we'll go on to the next step. And then after you get all your antifreeze drained out, we're gonna start taking the hoses off, pulling off the clamps. We'll go underneath real quick. Now, keep in mind, like I said, I already got all the antifreeze drained out. We're gonna start with these lowers. Make sure you have something down here to catch any antifreeze that may still be in the hoses that hasn't drained out with the, well, through the radiator. Come underneath. All right, so those 2 clamps, there we go. Those 2 clamps are off. Pull those hoses off in a second. But first, shine the light up here. As you're gonna see up under here, onto the water pump itself, there's another clamp. We're gonna wanna get that off. But yep, we'll just grab a hold of it, pull it down. That's done. Grab a hold of this hose and just kind of wiggle it back and forth until it comes off. Same thing with the others that we got off. Then we will go up top. Oh, sorry about this. All right, then we'll go up top then. Now that we're up top, we will get these upper hoses off, which we have a couple. Let's get this big one out. Take that one off, and then we'll go down here. Very little light, huh? Okay. Go down here. This is to your thermostat housing. Bring it up high enough to get it loose, and then I just like to grab a hold of the hose itself and kind of wiggle it around. Pull it up out of there. There we go. Oh, lost a tiny bit of antifreeze. And then we're gonna pull it up and around the belt, pull it out of there, because I am not taking that belt off just yet. I suggest you don't either. Explain why here in a few minutes. Okay, after you got that hose off, we need to go to this small hose here. You see this one here? That small hose goes right into the top of the water pump. I like using a long pair of needle noses for that one, just so I can get around the belt here without fighting it. We'll just squeeze and pull up. Now, like I say, you might have the other kind of hose clamps to where you just use a 8mm 5/16 socket, which is fine as well. You're gonna wanna get that pulled off, and then you can grab a hold of it with another pair of pliers. Kind of work it back and forth a little bit without tearing the hose up. And that'll help it come loose a bit. And then we'll be able to just wiggle it back and forth until it pops off. There we go. After you get that pulled off, just kind of tuck it out of the way. I just put it behind the fuel bowl housing here. Fuel filter housing, fuel bowl, whatever you want to call it. Just stick it out of the way. I also unplug this plug here and then the temperature sensor. Or yeah, I'm so sorry, that's not the temperature sensor. That is your exhaust back pressure sensor. So we'll unplug that as well, just to pull those out of the way. And same thing with the temperature sensor. So that's your temperature sensor. So you just push in on it. Oh, there we go. Push in, pull up, get that unplugged, and then you can kind of fish it around, and you'll be able to kind of pull it up out of the way as well. Just kind of drape it over the exhaust bag pressure sensor, and that'll clean that up for you a bit. Okay, now that that's done, let's go on to the next step, which, since we have those lower radiator hoses off, this reservoir can now come off, which you're gonna, well, if you have yours on here, your breaker bar for removing your tires, you're gonna get that removed, and then take an 8mm socket, get that loose, this top one here, take it, set it out of the way. Same thing with this one here next to the battery tray. It's an 8mm socket as well, or 8mm bolt rather. Get that one, and then the one right behind it. See if you can see that one. Yep. Okay. So we're gonna get that one as well. Once those two are off, let's see here, so you can see that better. Great. We'll grab those, set those out of the way. After those are off, everything will be loose besides the hose, which you can see coming out of the back of the reservoir here, and that will go into the radiator itself, which, if you can see, it's kind of a pain in the butt to fish that one out. So the easier alternative is just to pop the hose off right here and then just tuck it out of the way. This will save you some time, some hassle, and make it to where you don't have to fight. So we'll grab a hold of that, pull that off, and then wiggle that hose a little bit around. Try not to snap that plastic tip off, that little tit that the hose goes onto. And then you can just basically pull this whole reservoir up out of the way, and we're gonna set that over here so it doesn't get damaged, and then we'll go back to the engine. Okay, so once we have the reservoir out of the way, we've basically got all of our hoses out of the way, our radiators drained, and now we're ready to go on to the next step. You can just tuck this out of the way for now. And the next step would be to loosen the fan shroud, and I'm gonna take this light so you can see down here, and we're gonna knock that the fan itself loose. So then we're gonna take the fan shroud and the fan itself up, out, all together as a single unit, and that'll give us a lot of room to work. We won't need to remove the radiator to do this, and then yeah, that's the way I always do it. And the reason I leave the belt on is because whenever I'm knocking the fan loose, the belt actually will help hold the fan pulley itself in place and give it some tension, so I can get the fan clutch assembly loosened. So yeah, that's why I always leave the belt on until I'm ready to take the pump out. So yeah, so next step, let's grab that big wrench and start taking that bad boy off. If you're curious, the size of the wrench that's gonna fit on that fan clutch assembly is going to be a 48. Yep, that's a pretty good size wrench. Now I'm sure it's standard as well, but I use the metric one. So 48, and it's a big boy. I got this one at I got a whole set of them actually at Rural King is where I got these wrenches. And you look down in there, oh, excuse me, fits right on there, nice, tight, and that's what it looks like hanging out. So what I'd like to do is, before I start going crazy and trying to beat on that thing and trying to heat it up or whatever, several of them I've checked previously. I will stick my 48 metric on here and basically take a 3-pound sledge, my little 3-pound sledge here, and I'll hold the top with one hand up top here and take my 3-pound sledge and kind of just smack it a couple of times yeah, without, you know, without smacking your alternator there. But what I'll do is I'll smack it a couple times and see if it'll just come loose, because believe it or not, a lot of them will come loose. If it's kind of rough and it's not wanting to come loose, so the next step I go to I'll get me a nice long punch, and that's what I ended up having to do to this one. I took my punch, as you can see there's some marks on here. I took it, I sat it right on that edge so that I could kind of hit it at an angle, and I took that little 3-pound sledge and I just whacked it a few times. And if you just sit there and smack it a couple times and then take that wrench, turn it around to the other side and smack it going counterclockwise, by the way, you want to turn it to the left. So if looking at the front of the engine, you want to turn it to the left, and that's how you're going to get it loose. So anyway, I smacked it a couple times with that punch, and then sure enough, get the camera to focus for you without making a ton of noise. You can basically just turn the whole fan itself, and that'll spin that off for you. Be careful turning it too many times, because then your fan will just drop, and it will catch. It'll get caught on the inside of the fan shroud, but you don't want to damage your radiator, the fins on the radiator, or potentially knock a hole inside of your radiator. So just be careful spinning this off, and use both hands. And then after you get that loose, just kind of set it down inside your fan shroud. The next step will be to take this fan shroud off. We're gonna get an 8mm. Let's see, this fan shroud here. And there's one here. There's 2 8mm bolts. So take this one off. And then we'll go over to the other side and we'll take this one off. Then once you pull those 2 out, which I'm gonna do that off camera, we're gonna pull the fan and the fan shroud up out of here in one piece so we have some room. Once you get those 2 upper bolts out and you pull your fan shroud with your fan up out of here in one solid piece, like I did, you just set it out of the way. And then we're gonna pull that belt off if you already haven't. Just take a 1/2 inch. You could use a breaker bar, or I have a very long 1/2 inch ratchet. Let's go right over here to the tensioner pulley. We'll stick that 1/2 inch drive in there, and we'll pull up on it. So like you're loosening it. Once you pull up on it, that'll loosen it enough to where you'll be able to slide the belt off of. Once you have that off, the next thing we're gonna do is, since it's already on here and it's holding it still for us, we might as well pull this pulley off of here. Because unless yours came with another pulley, which mine did not, we're gonna need to reuse that. Mine also, my new water pump that is, did not come with this this threaded pipe here, so I'm gonna need to reuse this. Mine did come with this downspout. Mine also did not come with the thermostat housing or the thermostat, so I'm gonna have to reuse that as well. So we're gonna start taking all that off and get it cleaned up for our new water pump to go on. So first things first, we'll take off the pulley. Now that we got those 4 10mm bolts out, we'll just pull this pulley out of the way. Okay, and once we get this pulley off, the next step we're gonna go ahead and go to is we're gonna take a 10mm socket, and we're gonna take off all these 10mm bolts all the way around this water pump. I believe there are 10 bolts, like I say, and they're all 10mm. When you do this, do not use a 12-point socket. If you're unsure of what I'm talking about, this is a regular 10mm 6-point socket. And it's just called that because, as you can see, there are 6 points. If you use a 12-point, you're probably gonna round off some of these bolts, strip them. If you do that, you're gonna have a heck of a time trying to get the water pump out. Yeah, you don't want to get stuck before you even start. So use a 6-point, get those all loosened up, and then we're gonna pull that water pump out of there. I'm gonna loosen mine now, and then we'll pull it out together and we'll go to the next step. Okay, once we have all 10 of our bolts pulled out, we're gonna pull the water pump out. Next step is we need to clean these surfaces up. While you're in here, you need to look behind the water pump, which looks like I got some rubbing in there actually. Anyway, you need to look behind the water pump and see if there's any cavitation. What is cavitation? If you don't see it on mine, which I'm not seeing any, cavitation would be to where it's kind of corroding through this aluminum plate here, basically rotting. It's cavitating. If it's bad enough to where it looks like it's going to rot all the way through, you may end up have to replace this entire timing cover. Well, not this upper part here. This is your high pressure oil pump reservoir. But if this is cavitated to where you're going to get some leaks, or it's going to, you know, get antifreeze into your oil, you may need to replace your timing cover. I've actually had to replace a few of these. So it wouldn't be surprising if any of you guys in the comments section let me know that, you know, you found that yours has been cavitated. As clean as mine is, it looks like it might have been either replaced or they just did a lot of flushes. So somebody took care of it, I'd imagine, which it wouldn't surprise me. It looks like this was a fleet truck at one point in time. But yeah, so we want to get all this cleaned up, all this garbage. I mean, clean. That's the biggest mistake everybody I see on the YouTube, like I'm 100 years old, but on YouTube, on just guys at shops, you know, they don't clean it worth a piss. Just like whoever did this high pressure oil pump cover, the gear cover here. You see how it's all gunked up, and it must have been leaking because they over tightened the new back pressure sensor and it made a gap in there. So this, instead of just taking these bolts off, cleaning it up, and you know, cleaning everything up and putting new sealant on there, they just gummed a bunch around it, which is piss poor and it's gonna leak. So if you wanna have that same issue, do a bad job cleaning, because you will have a leak. I can guarantee it. So scrub that up, get a flat, you know, a blade, get a razor blade or something, scrape it nice and clean, you know, nice and flat. Don't gouge the shit out of it. Don't use a wire brush if you're gonna use it on, you know, like a drill. And if you do, use a brass wire brush so that it's not, the steel is gonna, you know, put too many gores in this. But yeah, clean it up real good. And then once you get this all cleaned up, you can start installing the new water pump and get it to where it's not gonna leak. You don't wanna do the same job twice over lack of cleanliness. Okay, so once you get everything scraped off, all the old gasket material, any of that dirt, any corrosion, anything, any buildup, once you get it all scraped off, cleaned off, what you're gonna wanna do is wipe everything down, make sure it's nice and dry, and then get yourself some brake cleaner. Just any old brake cleaner. This came from Roll King. Just any old brake cleaner. Put it on a clean cotton cloth. Like I just use, all my rags are my kids' old school clothes. This is an old sock. So just put it on a clean cotton rag and wipe brake cleaner all the way around the gasket mating surface. That's gonna get any kind of oil, grease, or oily residue off to help that seal better. Then we're gonna go over to the new water pump, which I already have out. New water pump came with a new downspout. Just bolted on already. So take your, you're gonna wanna take your old water pump and take this pipe fitting off of it. It just unscrews. I used a 26mm wrench, unscrewed it. Mine came with, my new water pump came with a little round O-ring. You put it around that, bolt it down in there. Sorry, thread it down in there and tighten it up. Then you're gonna wanna pull your thermostat housing and your thermostat out of your old water pump, okay? Take them apart. Here's that new gasket for the, that's the O-ring gasket for, yeah, the O-ring gasket. The thermostat gasket for this thermostat housing, sorry. Get this cleaned up. You see I took a wire brush to the bottom, got it shined up pretty good. Got a lot of that corrosion off the side. Then take your brake parts cleaner, wipe this down as well. We want those mating surfaces to be nice and clean. No oil, no grease, none of that crap on there. Once you're ready to put your water pump into the truck on the motor, before you do so, make sure all your tabs are pressed down in so this seal is all, pressed in all the way around and it doesn't go on lopsided or hang down or get pinched in the process as you're putting it on, okay? And what I like to do on every single one of these water pumps, I've had some leak in the past because of some, corrosion and pitting on the surfaces of the timing cover on the engine. So I take some of this International, which is the OEM RTV made specifically for this engine. International part number is T442, but you can go to AutoZone, Napa, Advanced Auto, any of those, and get any kind of RTV, black, gray. There's some RTV that says for thermostat housing or water pumps, they're specific. So what I like to do is, just to make 100% sure they're not gonna make leaks, is I'll take some of this and put a thin coating. Well, let me see here. I'm trying to look at it through the lens. I don't even put it on this heavy. So I'll take a little bit of that and then just see, it's kind of coagulated from sitting, but I'll clean that up. Just a thin film, there we go, something like that, all the way around that seal. Don't miss any spots. Put a thin film all the way around. Once you get that done, we'll go on to the next step, which is putting this on, putting the water pump onto the engine. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my thin film on now, and then we'll go. Okay, once I got a nice coating over top of the entire gasket, what next thing I'm gonna do is bring it over here to the truck, well, the engine rather, and get it set up to where we can start putting it back together. So what I do is I take, out of all those bolts we took out, I will take 3 or 4 of the smallest ones, see there, and line them up first, because they're the easiest ones to figure out where they go. Because like right here on top, see that small, how thin the material is here? Clearly that's where one of these small ones goes. So that's what I like to do to get it lined up. So we'll get this put up against there. I'll just start one of these by hand. All right, okay. And that'll allow that to hang there while I go down here and start a couple others. And then once you get them started, that's the hardest part. And then figuring out where the rest of the bolts go will be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so once we get them all started, which I now have every single one of the bolts in, snug down, just finger tight, what you're gonna wanna do is get yourself a torque wrench. If you don't have a torque wrench, just what you're gonna wanna do is start here, tighten this one down, and then crisscross, go down to the one down here, back up to this one, the one all the way over here, then maybe up to this one, back over to there, and then this one, and then so on and so forth. So just crisscross and get it nice and snug down. Don't over torque them, but also don't leave them loose. Get them snug down pretty tight. It calls for 18 foot-pounds, which isn't super tight, but it's with, if I'm using a ratchet this long, I've got to put a little bit of force into it. So if you're using a regular sized ratchet, 18 foot-pounds will feel like you're actually starting to, struggle a bit tightening it. So give it a nice, couple cranks, and then we'll move on to the next step. And then now that we have all of the water pump bolts actually torqued down, or if you didn't torque them down, tighten down. Now that they're nice and snugged up, next thing we're going to want to do is move on to the thermostat housing. So we'll take our thermostat. If you got a new one, it's time you use it. If not, you just reuse the one that you had out of your old one. Go ahead and throw your thermostat in there. Make sure you do like I said and clean up the thermostat housing real well. Take your new seal, the gasket here that came with the water pump, and it's basically just gonna fit right down inside on top of that. Now, I've had a lot of fun with these, and I'm being sarcastic if you can't tell. A lot of these didn't want to fit down in there. They'd be too big. It'd just be a pain in the ass. So if yours is like that, you're not alone. Just fight with it until you can get it to stay in place. It's got to be on the inside of that lip, going around in the circle, so that whenever this housing goes over top of it, this beveled edge here, sorry about that, this beveled edge can go on the inside of the gasket and kind of push out on it and down to keep it nice and snugged tight so it doesn't allow any of the antifreeze to leak out. Perfect. So all three of those are torqued down. After you get that snugged down, we're going to move on to putting our pulley on our water pump. Okay, so, and then putting the pulley on is going to be about as simple as anything. We're just going to, I mean, and once again, as far as torquing it down, you can torque this just like everything else, but I'm not even going to torque the pulley. I'm just going to get them nice and tight because it's a flush surface and they're both hard surfaces and there's nothing that's going to leak or anything like that. So, but if you want to torque them down, I believe it's also 18 foot. And boom, just like that, those are tightened down. Magic. And then next we're going to take these wires and plug in our invisible sensor, which I'll put mine in later if you're wondering. And then reach down here and plug in this crank sensor. Oh, snap that in. And then this plastic piece right here, there should be, yeah, there's a hole right here drilled into the, it's tapped into the side of the water pump. That's what this plastic piece is for. There should be a pin here, well, a little snap fitting that will push into that hole. All right, so then before we go any farther, let's go ahead and get our serpentine belt back on. I got mine on. There's no reason for me to film me putting it on. If you want, just let's put it like this. You can pause the video and see how I have that routed. Yours may have the diagram on the side, as it should. If not, then as I said, you can just pause the video. And then we'll go on to the next step, which is we're going to be putting our fan and our fan shroud back on. I like to hold the fan on the inside of the shroud, facing towards the engine, and just lower both of them down in at the exact same time. Then once we have that fan started onto that pulley, we can come up here and use our bolts and start putting them back in to hold this shroud back in place on this side, and oh, let me turn you around here, and on this side. And then once our shroud is held in place, we can tighten that fan the rest of the way down. And now we have our fan shroud tightened down. So we're going to spin this fan the rest of the way on until it butts up against our pulley down here. There we go. And believe it or not, you do not have to tighten this fan down, the fan clutch itself, to that pulley very hard, because the way the engine turns, it is not going to loosen itself but tighten it. It will tighten itself as the engine turns. So once you get it snugged up, if you want, you can take your wrench and just tighten her down a bit, but it is not going anywhere, I assure you. Then we need to start putting our hoses back together. we're going to do that next. The first hose that I'm going to start with would be this small upper hose. And as you can see, I've got a new clamp on it. It's going to be the clamps that you can tighten rather than the OEM squeeze style clamps. I don't trust them, as I told you earlier in the video. I will not reuse any of the OEM clamps. They were great when they were new, but as the years go on, they lose some of their elasticity and they will most likely leak. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a new clamp on that one. I'll tighten that down, and then we'll put our upper radiator hose. As you can see, I've gotten the old clamps off of that. New clamps on. Start fishing that through now. And let me shine the light where you, or the camera where you can actually see it. And I like to fish it right through the inside of there. Right through that hose, right through that belt. Pull it down. Now, keep in mind, your hose might be shorter than mine, and your hose might go from here directly to the radiator, directly to the thermostat housing, instead of having to be fished through the belt like mine does. So, you know, two different styles, same end result, you know. So now that we got that one fished through, we'll get the clamp slid up to the top and tighten that down. And since we got these upper hoses on, if you have this design hose rather than the hose that goes directly from the radiator across to the thermostat housing, bypassing the belt, you won't need to worry about it. But if yours loops to the outside of the belt, you're going to want to put a zip tie around here to keep it from rubbing. And as you can see, if we zoom in, see that there? Yeah, let's not make the same mistake the previous owner did and let that hose rub against the belt, because that's gonna cause you to be stranded. So we got both upper hoses on. Now we are going to put our coolant reservoir and one of the lower hoses that goes to the bottom of the radiator. First, we're going to fish this hose, down through here. Kind of just push it around everything. You don't have to be perfect, because you'll be able to reach it from underneath once it's at least down by the fan blades. So we'll get that pushed down in there a bit. Take our reservoir, get our flashlight out of the way. Take our reservoir and set it up just like this. Doesn't have to be perfect. Then that hose that you took and pushed out of the way earlier, you're gonna bring that back around, get it set up. But before we start putting that on, let's go underneath. Once we're underneath, we'll be able to find that hose. There it is that we were fishing through. We'll grab that, pull that down. We'll get our new clamp and get it put on here. Once you get your clamp on, we're gonna go ahead and slide that hose onto the radiator. Just to keep it out of the way, and then we'll tighten that clamp down and go back up top. Once we get back up top, we're gonna finish installing this coolant reservoir bottle. Before we do that, we're gonna slide this hose back on. Notice the new clamp. Like I said, if you wanna reuse the factory clamps that are going to leak, not might, they're gonna eventually, you can. But I always, like I say, I always go to the new clamps. So we'll get that tightened up. You don't need to watch me do that. We're gonna line this up here and down here. There are 3 bolts, obviously, that you're gonna use. There's 2 long ones and 1 very short one. The short stubby one has got to be installed up top. That goes here. If by some chance you mix it up with one of the other ones, it can go through and crack your radiator. If it's too long, your radiator sits directly underneath there. If the bolt's too long, you can go under and put a hole in the top of the plastic. It's not technically plastic, I forget the name of it, but the black plastic on the radiator. So use that short stubby one up top, and then put your 2 longer bolts rather down bottom here, get them installed. Oh, keep in mind these are all 8mm. Once you get those all lined up, we'll tighten those down real quick. And presto, like magic, those are all tightened down. Reservoir is in place. Upper hoses are in place. All these sensors are plugged back in. My temperature sensor is missing. I'm going to replace that later. So now we're going to go back under the truck. And once we are back underneath the truck, we are going to install our last lower hose. As you can see, it goes up there to the water pump downspout and comes over here to this large fitting in the radiator. Now, what I want you to keep in mind is on your radiator hose, your lower, it is a one-directional hose. So one end is going to have a large opening, and that's going to go up to the water pump downspout. And the other side is a bit smaller, and that's going to go into the radiator. So keep that in mind so you're not fighting with it and wondering why one side's not fitting and the other is. And then we'll just slide one side up. Oh, already have our new clamp in place, of course. So we'll just slide that side on. Come over here to this side. Oh. Don't want to zoom in too far. Let me get that. Okay. And then we will slide this hose in place, just like the upper side, and turn my clamp around to where it's facing downwards. Perfect. And then I will tighten those two clamps. And while you're under here, you need to keep in mind, since you drained your antifreeze, you're going to need to make sure that you retighten your valve, your drain valve. So turn that to the right as far as you can. Just snug it up. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. You can break it. And then you are going to be able to refill your radiator without leaking on the floor. And then once we have that done, we have two final steps. Small steps, but still steps. First of all, we're going to put our tire tool back where it goes if yours came with one. And bolt it back down in place. Oh. Crooked, no problem. Okay, once you get that done, the next thing is you're going to refill your coolant system. Now, mine had about 5 gallons come out. So what I'm going to do, which I cannot do right this second because I don't have my coolant temp sensor on, but you can. So fill it with 4.5 gallons or so until you get up to this max line. If it goes down, add some more. If it's not running, by the way, leave it not running. Fill it up a few times until it stops going down once it hits max. Then you're going to leave your cap off. Get into the truck, start it up, and let it run and let it idle with this cap off. Turn your heater to defrost, high setting, on heat, put it on defrost, and let that run until the engine pretty much reaches operating temperature. So once it's getting to operating temperature and you can feel that your heat is working, that's it. So shut it back off, let the truck cool down, see if the level has dropped any. If it has, refill to the max mark or directly under. Put your cap back on, go for a test drive. That should be it. You're good to go. Keep an eye on it from there. Go up and down some hills to release any air bubbles that are trapped in the system. And continue to check that to make sure you're not leaking anything and you are staying at the max or in between the max and minimum level. Then that'll do it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, any other videos you'd like to see me make, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And I appreciate you guys. See you on the next one.